What is consciousness? And what does it mean to truly live life awake? Welcome to Clarity to Consciousness, a podcast where we transcend beyond stereotypes, embracing a deeper understanding. I'm your host, Kristen Griffiths, a fellow seeker on this path. Join me on a journey as we dive into conversations with experts, unraveling stigmas, and expanding our awareness to something profound. This is your invitation to open your mind with me as together we bring clarity to the fascinating complexities of human consciousness. Welcome to Clarity to Consciousness, where we seek to bring clarity to the complexities of human consciousness. I'm your host, Kristen Lee Griffiths, and I'm deeply grateful to have you back with me again. Today's episode is a very special one because it's the first of a 3-part series on conscious divorce. We'll be exploring the beginning and middle stages of divorce today, which is a sensitive and significant life transition. Then in our next episode, or part 2, we will talk about anything that could come up post-divorce, like moving out, moving into new relationships, and also making sure that we keep the children front of mind. And finally, in part 3, we will discuss the spiritual side of divorce and what it could mean from a higher perspective beyond what we deal with in our 3D reality here. My intention for this series is this. While it may not have been a perfect situation or that we handled it perfectly, I'm only human, I will say that the work that I did with professionals had really helped me navigate this life experience and made it what I think was a lot less painful than it could have been. And also, while I'm not perfect, as I mentioned, my former husband and I have a healthy relationship and we work well together to co-parent. And I really emphasize that this, I believe, manifested because of the work that I did to help envision and picture this going smoothly. I worked a lot on my mindset and myself through this process. And I think in those changes, I went from thinking that this was going to be a really hard process, something that's really awful, that is the worst thing that could ever happen, to something that didn't look that bad. And I owe it a lot to the work that I did with the coach. I benefited from the working with somebody named Rudy Rigsteins. He was featured on episode 4 of this podcast. So if you haven't heard that one, I highly recommend you listen to that one. But ultimately for me, this process was fairly smooth, all things considered. And my goal today is to help others going through it. I hope those listening find value in what we share here today. And I really hope to bring that to you. Now, unfortunately, when I went through the thick of things, I did not know my guest here today. But I believe that she would have been an excellent resource to me, and I'm very excited to share her with all of you. She has decades of experience in family law and excels in coaching, mediating, and conflict resolution. Her book, titled Co-Parenting Tips You Must Have, has helped many families navigate the challenges of divorce with grace and understanding. And I believe we're kindred spirits because she's also someone who uses her intuition to help others navigate this emotional life situation. I'm thrilled to have her for 2 episodes here with us in this series. Please welcome Kimberly Sisk to the podcast. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited to have you. So I would love for you to share a little bit more about yourself and how you became an expert in supporting others in separation and divorce.
Well, I originally, when I was in high school, I was going to go to cosmetology school, and the universe had a different plan for me. And so I ended up becoming a single mother right out of high school. And there was a program that allowed you to go to school, and they would pay you to go to school, and they would pay for the daycare and help you. And one of the programs was a paralegal. And so I thought, well, that's probably more interesting than some of the other options. So I took it. And so I've been a paralegal since 1990. So I'm kind of, sharing my age here. But that's about 34 years I've been doing this, and I love helping families. It was my calling, and I really like to focus on the kids. If we can help the families, help the kids get through this, because ultimately they're going to be taking care of us when, we are, you know, getting older.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I agree. The children are so important, and
they
being a
are.
mom of a young boy, really support that very much
Well,
so. So,
well, I remember we had discussed, like, it's hard when you're going through a divorce on what do you share, what don't you share, how much do the kids
yeah.
need to know, trying to protect the kids, especially if the other parent's not. There's
Hmm.
definitely some tricks and tips, as far as how to do that, that we
Yeah,
can, get into, a little further into the podcast.
that sounds really good. Well, I know that this episode is really about the beginning stages, and I think what one of the hardest things I first had to tackle, and I still remember it. I remember the day that the idea popped into my mind. Oh my God, maybe we'll end up being divorced. And I remember that being a very scary thought. And I'm curious from you, how does somebody come to the very hard decision that divorce is the best option?
Well, aside from the obvious, if there's abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, alcoholism, that, or drug abuse, things that the other party doesn't want to grow and learn from. Those are obviously a, hard no, right? And the sooner you get out of those situations, the better for yourself. And if you have children, the better for the children, right? If it's not those situations, right, then it really comes down to pouring energy into each other, right? Um, you cannot have a relationship if you're the only one in the relationship, right? If you're doing everything. And so one of the first things I would look for, or that I've seen, is if someone has, signed out of the relationship. It's not so much if they have a foot out the door, it's more if they're not willing to have that foot possibly come back in the door, right? If you're like, hey, we really need to talk. If they're open to talking, great. If they're open to going to counseling, great. Even if it's just a mutual couple that you guys look up to, right? And you're like, can we just sit down with them and say, look, this is where we're struggling. Can you give us some tips? And you're both willing to try. But if one of you is not willing to try, then I would probably try for a little bit and give grace to the other person, right? Because you want to make sure that you did try. You gave it your all, so
Mhm.
that when you do say, okay, this is over, I have literally tried everything, and you have given the other person grace. Maybe they're going through stuff they're not ready to share with you, right? But if you give them grace and you make the space, like, look, you got to talk to me. I'm here when you're ready. And they're still not doing it after a period of time.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm just, life is short, and it's not that I advocate for divorce, because I don't. But I also realize that you can waste a lot of time trying to convince a fish to climb a tree, and it's just not going to happen.
That's a good analogy. I think that was something that I struggled with, just knowing the gravity of the decision. It's like, how do you know you've given it enough time to allow things to either change, or trust that you're making that decision in the best interest of everybody involved. I think that was a really hard thing. Ultimately, for me, it just kind of came down to my gut and what my gut felt was right. And
Yeah,
but yeah, I questioned all the time, like, how long do I give this?
yeah. No, well, your gut, we underestimate how important our instincts are. And if you think about this, from a very early age, it is squashed, right? We don't look at little children and say, hey, what do you want to do today? We generally say, hey, do you want to go for a walk, or do you want to ride your bike? We give them options. We limit their curiosity. We limit their, ability to just explore and do what they want based on their gut or their instincts, right? And so they grow up having choices. They don't ever just get to say, hey, if you could do anything today, what would you like to do? We never say that to children because Lord help us if they say we want to go and do a whole bunch of things and it's going to take us 5 hours. We don't have that kind of time, all the time. But if
Yeah.
we could magically work it in occasionally to be able to do that, to help them explore that, they would grow up being able to trust their gut much more. So as adult women, right, or even men, we're not, we're like, hey, I need to make a choice, but I'm not given my choices yet. Like, it's much more open than just one or two, like A or B. And so we really have to learn to trust our gut more. We have to have faith that we know what we're doing. Even when everybody is looking at you and saying you're making a mistake, if your gut is telling you this is what you need to do, you absolutely need to follow your gut. It's just what you have to do. And so you'll know. Like I've been in enough relationships. There's never been a time when I didn't know. I may not have wanted to accept it, which is a whole different conversation. But your gut
And yes.
knows. I mean, You just have to be in the right space. And there's a ton of reasons why people wait, right? Like they know they have to leave. They know this relationship is not going anywhere. But there's, the kids are going to be starting college, or the kids are just, starting kindergarten, or financially. There's 100 reasons why they will talk themselves out of it and say, okay, I'm just going to hang in here a little longer. And, and that's okay. Every case is specific to that person. There is no right or wrong whatsoever.
Yeah. I had heard something once. A friend had given me this advice, and her name's Erica. So if she's listening, thank you, Erica. This was really helpful advice. But you hear sometimes people stay together for the kids.
Mhm.
And my friend Erica, she experienced divorce as a child pretty young. And her perspective on it as an adult was really interesting. She said, as an adult, I've always remembered my parents apart, and I never knew any differently. And for me, it was just a way of life, and it was okay. And I think that was really helpful for me, thinking about my son, because he was about her age when she had her parents had gotten divorced. And it just was very reassuring that for her, she looked at it as a blessing, and she didn't look at it as a detriment to her childhood. Whereas sometimes I think as the children get older, there's that greater attachment to family, and maybe it is a little bit harder. So not to say that you should stay together if your children are older too, if it doesn't feel right, but it just gave me some peace of mind knowing that my son, being so young, would be okay.
No, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because a lot of people they want to stay together because of the kids, right? But they're underestimating how smart kids are. Kids know. Like kids,
Yeah.
even though we're squishing the intuitive part, by not giving them too much, leeway and options in the world, they still have more intuition than even adults, right? Because it hasn't been fully, squashed like for us. And they know, they know if their mom's not happy. They know if their dad's not happy. They know if their parents are fighting. Even if you're in the bedroom with the door shut and you're whispering quietly, it doesn't matter. They know things aren't right. And that environment is not necessarily better for children than an environment where two adults say, okay, this isn't working for us to be together. We need to separate, but how can we make it easy for the kids, right? And there is a ton of suggestions on how not to put the kids in the middle, right? And if the kids are not put in the middle, they are going to be resilient and they're going to be fine. It's the parents that are in constant conflict. And you can have conflict whether you're together or whether you're separated. It's the conflict that causes the kids problems. It is not the fact whether the parents are together or separated. That makes sense.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's a really helpful point. Do you think that there are telltale signs and feelings that indicate a relationship might be ending beyond what we had already talked about?
Oh, definitely. You know, how people talk to you, if they like you or not. right? And I would say that the biggest tell sign is how someone speaks to you, right? If you are in a home and you're in a relationship and that person is talking to you like you are an amazing human and they adore you and respect you, that's fantastic. But if they do not have that and they're talking to you with disdain or like, ugh, like, why are you asking that again? Or like, oh my gosh, didn't we just talk about this? Do we have to talk about it again? They're not valuing you as a human. Okay. And unless you have that respect between each other, it's going to be really hard to have any close relationship to where you can develop and build together, right? Because who you are in the beginning of a relationship is never who you are 2 years in, 3 years in, or 5 years in, right? So you both have to be committed to basically allowing the other person to grow and learning who they are as they're growing and accepting that new person over and over and vice versa. And so I would say the number one tell sign is how they treat you.
That
Especially
is
if you're
so
upset.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, so good. During the time where I was experiencing it, a lot of it wasn't during COVID. And I think, everybody's just home with each other all the time. You're in
Yeah.
each other's faces. And so you're talking a lot or you're not talking. And also I'm curious too, if you would agree the lack of communication is also a sign.
Absolutely. I mean, if they don't want to share their day with you, I mean, if they're just like, look, I'm really exhausted from my day. I just want to sit here and watch TV. They have no desire to even ask you how your day was. I mean, so if they're not sharing their day and they don't want to hear about your day,
Yeah.
they're just not interested in you as a person. Because if your best friend called you up, right? Even if you're
Mhm.
tired, you're going to be like, hey, how are you doing? How was your day? If the person that you're supposed to be committed with, building a life together with, is not interested in how your day went, they're just not in the relationship. Like they are
Yeah.
emotionally distant. And that's a sign, right? But again, that's how they're talking to you. It goes right back because if you say, hey, how was your day? And they're like, it was fine. I don't want to talk about it. How are they treating you? Right? It goes right back to how are they treating you? Like, are they treating you like a respected human being that you are? Like you are, because even if you don't, the relationship is going to be done, right? You're still an amazing person. You're still an amazing mother. You're still an amazing, human being on this planet. And if they cannot respect you just for being an amazing human being, that's just the basic requirement, right? And if you're
Yeah.
with somebody, you're sleeping with them, you're sharing finances, you're raising kids together. I mean, it should be on a whole higher level of that respect of like, no, this person is
Mhm.
freaking awesome and they're with me. Or like, I'm sharing a kid with this person. How lucky am I? Like, if they don't
Yeah.
have that attitude, then there's obviously some repair that needs to happen because it is
Yeah.
possible. It's absolutely 100% possible, but it takes work. And we're tired. We're working full time. We're raising kids. It's hot outside. At least in Arizona, it's hot. The traffic. I mean, you
Yeah.
could go for the 100 things, of what's going on in the world, but if you're building with somebody, like you have to make that a priority. It's got to be because when
Mhm.
you're 80 years old and everything else is said and done, you're gonna be looking at each other saying, "Wow, we did this." Or you're
Yeah.
gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, who are you? Like you've been tagging along for the last
Mhm.
30 years. I don't even know who you are." So
Right.
I think it just depends
Right.
on what you want in the world. Like
Mhm.
what you want to give, because you can't give to the world when all you're doing is focused on how horrible your environment is,
Yeah.
or how sad your environment is, right? And
Mhm.
so, you want to make sure that the space that you are dwelling in, there was a saying, and I don't know if you and I spoke about it, but like dirt and soil, in dirt things die, but in soil things grow. And so you just want to make sure your environment is soil, right? And if there's a weed that's getting in your soil that's trying to threaten to turn your soil to dirt, you need to clear that up. It does not matter if it's a relative, if it's a spouse, if it's a a best friend for life. It doesn't matter. If it is toxic to your soil, you need to clear it up because this is your only soil you get, right? And you were put here for a reason. So even though you're a mom, a spouse, you still have your own individual reasons for being here and things that you need to accomplish for you. I think that was a little off tangent, but it kind of all blends together.
It really does blend together, and I really love that dirt and soil analogy. You and I hadn't talked about that, but that's really good. It's really good. And then the last thing I'll just say for, just knowing when it's time, because this was really important for me as I was thinking about life and things. And then we'll move on to, what the first steps are, is just something you said about growth. And I think people can stay stagnant or people can grow. And sometimes I also heard, and speaking in analogies, I also heard this analogy, which I thought was very helpful in my process, was if you think about a school and you have a first grade and you have a teacher for first grade, and then you're moving on through the grades, you wouldn't keep your first grade teacher throughout your life, because eventually that teacher is going to teach you everything you need to know. So you need to evolve, and you need the teacher to evolve with you, and you need to grow together. And I thought that this was an interesting way of thinking, because if you are trying to grow but you still have the same first grade teacher this whole time, you may be a little bit stuck and stagnant. And I think it just speaks to, sometimes people want to stay the same, and I don't want to say stagnant, because maybe that's fine. Maybe that's fine for them. And stagnant has like a negative connotation, but then some people want to grow. I think I was just developing into a whole new person in a lot of ways. And not to say that my spouse was stagnant, but I just think that we were going in different directions. And I think that sometimes can lead to a lot of changes in the relationship and ultimately end it.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you 100%. There's a couple things. Number one, people never grow or learn when you're happy. I mean, it just doesn't happen, right? You're happy. Why would you change anything? All the growth always happens when it is painful. I mean, there's that saying that people don't change until it's too painful not to change. And, and that's just the universe, telling you something you literally already know, you just aren't ready to accept. So the universe will put you on the path that you need to be, whether you want to or not. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I fully believe, and again, this goes back to more individual, even though we're talking about relationships. I believe, have you ever watched that movie, Adjustment Bureau? And
yes, I love that movie.
Okay.
Yes, so
right?
good.
Yeah, so it keeps you on your path, right? And I've always looked at my relationships, and well, let me take that back. I didn't always look at my relationships this way. It wasn't until I realized that I was like kind of had like empath abilities and more intuitive, like when I was really working and developing that over the last decade. I look back at my other relationships and I realize even now that my relationships served a purpose, right? So, my first marriage, I was young, I was 25. We lived in Ohio, grew up, grew up there, lived there, moved to Ohio with his job. I mean, from Ohio to Arizona with his job. And I realized that that was the whole purpose of that relationship. It was not meant to last a lifetime. It was to move me to Arizona. And had I not been in that relationship and had not been married, I would not have moved to Arizona. And I could literally look at every relationship. My one, and I have been married, and divorced more than once. And while that's sometimes has a negative connotation to it, I also realized that my purpose with each of those relationships stopped at the same time the relationship ended. Like I was married for 10 years. He was an alcoholic. He would stop drinking, and then he would start drinking, and then he would stop drinking. But it wasn't until his son, who was my stepson, turned 18. And I just instantly was like, oh, my job here is done. I was literally to be there to help raise his son. And then once that part was done, I was free to then carry on and go on to my next adventure. And
Yeah.
every relationship, there has been some good that has come out of it, despite the negative, despite the, sadness, or, all of the, heartache. Something good has always come out of every relationship, and I can see what my part was in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I basically feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing on this planet. And that is a relief. Even if nobody else agrees with it or they have their opinions of it, I know that I'm doing what I should be doing. And there is a lot of relief in that, just a lot of peacefulness and just satisfaction of like, you know what? Maybe that marriage didn't work out. I'm not a failure because of that. My part was done. Like,
Yeah.
my part was done. And I can now move on to do other things and to touch other people's lives in other ways. So, yeah, I'm not a big person of thinking like we should dwell on what didn't work. I mean, think about why it didn't work. What was your part? Grow from it, learn from it, but then move forward. I
Mm.
living in the past is just not a good use of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well said. So wise. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, well, thank you for
So I
listening.
Of course, and I hope all of your words of wisdom are really helping those out there who may be in a similar
Yes.
position.
No, no.
So the next steps are really thinking about what are the first steps as
Yeah.
to taking it to the next level. Once
Mhm.
you know it's the right decision, what is the next step to take?
Well, it depends, right? So if you're in a relationship where the other person is going to lose their cool, right? And they are not going to be adult about it, and they're not going to be able to have a conversation about separating things. Your approach has to be 100% different than an approach of like being able to sit down and say, hey, look, we're not really getting along. This isn't working. Can we talk about separating? Right. So if you have the situation where it is not a good situation, then there's a lot of prepping before you even talk about a divorce with that person. So number one, you're going to want to get copies of all your documents, right? You're going to want to have copies of your tax returns, copies of your payroll, copies of their payroll. You're going to want copies of, utilities, mortgage statements, mortgage loans, basically bank statements, just anything and everything that your life revolves around. And you're going to want copies of those either on a thumb drive that is separate from the house, like kept at a friend's house, a relative's house, just someplace safe other than at the home. You're going to want to also prep on having a place that you can go to so that when you do have the discussion, that if it turns ugly, that you can literally just get your keys, get up, and walk out. Okay. And this does not necessarily mean it's a guy or a girl. It could be either way,
Mhm.
right? It's just if
Right.
the person is not going to be reasonable to have a conversation. Some people recommend that you have a conversation at a restaurant. I'm not a big proponent of the restaurant.
Right.
A park would be okay. But I just think that people are more, obviously they're more comfortable in their home, right? I definitely recommend being outside, mainly because, being outside, it's just more natural and it's not confined all the emotions in the house. So your vibes are basically going up into the air. You have more space. As crazy as it sounds, barefoot, right? Having both people like, hey, I really want to talk to you, but we need to take our shoes and socks off, we just need to be sitting outside in the backyard, in lawn chairs with our feet on the ground, right? Because it helps
Interesting.
grounding. I know it sounds
Yes.
crazy and they may be like, what are we doing? And they may be mad, but do you know how less mad you can be when you're barefoot stomping across a grass filled, yard? I mean, it sounds silly, but it just
That's
helps like take away some of that energy, right? Because it's going to build up negative energy, especially if the person's not stable, right? Um, and if it does go sideways, literally, you just have to again get into the car. I would not have the children in the home when you have a
mhm.
conversation.
Yeah.
I would have them at a friend's house, cousin's house, grandma's, wherever. Um, so and again, you won't really know where it's going to go until you have that conversation. But if you have all of the papers, all this stuff in a safe place, right? I would also get personal items. Like I wouldn't pack up the house. I mean, that's not, in certain states you can't do that. But if you have jewelry from your great grandma, if you have a gun that your great great grandpa had passed down from generation to generation, like I would have anything that is sentimental that literally cannot be replaced in a safe place. Because the last thing you want to worry about is material items when this goes down, right? So I would just do some prepping, right? The prepping isn't necessarily if the other person is a reasonable person, right? But again, you know the person better than anybody. And you can be like, oh, they're going to handle it just fine. And they may not, right? So you still may want to do some prepping slightly, maybe not to that degree. There's a lot of, I definitely would recommend that if anybody is thinking of doing, talking about a divorce, talk to a coach or talk to even an attorney and just say, look, what do I need to do ahead of time? Right? Because you want to be smart about it, right? And this isn't about being sneaky or doing anything behind the other person's back. Obviously, if things were great, you wouldn't have to do that. But they're not great and they're not in a place that you can trust them. And so you need to make sure that you are just doing things that you are legally allowed to do, but yet you're protecting yourself and you're not making knee-jerk reactions. Like knee-jerk reactions are the thing that gets everybody in trouble. Like, they're like, no, he just made me mad. And I just said, I want a divorce and I stormed out of the house. Well, then you're going to have chaos, right? You're going to have trouble getting your clothes. You're going to have trouble, if they, people start getting restraining orders. I mean, it can go sideways and turn into a very big nightmare very, very quickly. So you just want to always not have knee-jerk reactions. Just say, whoo, I got to breathe on this one. Go outside, take your shoes off, walk in the grass, breathe in the air. Even taking a shower helps wash away, the negative vibes. Like just anything that lets you get your cool back, right? Because this is not the time to react when you're in a negative vibe, right? You want to be smart about this, So those would be the things that I would initially think about prepping. As far as with the kids, I wouldn't say anything to the children, right? Because so many parents, and it's heartbreaking, really, to be honest, they'll go to the kids and they'll be like, look, I think I'm going to, talk to your daddy tonight and we're not going to be together, or the dad will say, hey, I'm going to, your mom's kicking me out and, so I've got to leave. And the children don't know what to do with that. And I'm not honestly 100% sure why adults are saying that. Like, what do they expect the kids to say? Like, okay, cool. Thanks for letting me know, mom, dad. I mean, it just doesn't even make sense, right? But sometimes the adults, the only people they have are their kids, right? And so they want to talk to the kid and give, like, hey, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. No, the kids are going to feed off your vibe, right? So after you decide what you're doing, then is when you can let the children know, say, your daddy and I decided that, we're not a good match together. And, we're going to, go and stay at grandma's house for a little bit, but you're going to see daddy, you're going to see him every other weekend, or you're going to do this and that. Kids are going to have questions. Never drag the kids into it. Absolutely say, look, I know you have a lot of questions, but your daddy and I both love you. You're going to be taken care of with us. You guys are safe. It's all good, but this is adult stuff and we've got you. You're okay. And just remind them they're okay. And it's adult stuff. It's always tempting, especially when the other parent, if the other parent starts, saying, oh, your mom's difficult, or, oh, your dad's being, a jerk. It's really easy to try to be like, oh, the kids already know, so I'm just going to fill them in. And, no, it is adult topics. It's adult conversation. Absolutely do not do that. You will never, ever regret not having those conversations with those children, right? What you do is you give the kids the tools, and this is something that they can use throughout the rest of their life. When something comes up, you can say, you know what? You can say, hey, that's an adult topic. I'm going to go and color, or I'm going to go ride my bike. They can have the right, respect respectfully to say, ooh, that's an adult stuff. Like, I don't need to hear that. I'm just a kid. And give them permission to say it to you too, right? Say, hey, if I say something about your dad that's an adult, topic, please call me out on it. And the kids will, right? Because they don't want to hear it anymore. Like, they don't want to be part of that. They really, truly just want to be kids, and they're just stuck in the middle of two adults that decide they don't want to be together anymore.
Yeah.
And so, yes, if there's one thing that I would love is to have parents be more aware of making sure the kids stay out of it, even if it's just one parent holding that line, right? Because that parent that holds the line will not ever regret it. Like, they will, it's hard. It's really, really hard, but they will never regret it. They will always be very happy and thankful that they did. Because it'll show in the kids. They'll see it. As the kids become adults, they will see the outcome of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that helps a lot. I think that reinforces, some of the decisions that we had made with our son. I think it's really helpful to hear that. Anything else? I think that, making sure that we address the children was the last section that I really wanted to make sure we touched on in the beginning stages today. And as you start to move out, anything about, co-parenting or schedules or anything like that in those beginning stages when you're trying to figure out this new life separated?
Yes. So a lot of parents, they have this idea, right? And it's probably because of social media, but it's like, oh, I have to have the kids X amount of time, right? Or I'm going to pay a lot of child support, and my tip for any parent would be stop worrying about the amount of time that you have necessarily with the children in the beginning, right? When you're trying to come up with a parenting plan for parents, right? Everyone's like, well, I want them half the time. Okay. This is where you start from. And this has worked in literally hundreds and hundreds of, conflicting custody cases. Tell me about the child's schedule. Monday morning. Who normally wakes the child up when you guys are together? Mom does. Okay. Who picks the child up from school on Mondays? Dad does. Okay. Who feeds a child Monday night? Well, mom does. Okay. So you get the child's schedule and you see which parent is doing what throughout the week, right? Then you look and say, okay, Dad, what in this schedule doesn't work for you? Or what would you like to pick up? Right? So if you pick the child up on Monday afternoon and mom feeds the child Monday, are you willing to pick the child up and feed the child Monday night? And then mom can pick the child up on Tuesday and feed the child Tuesday night, right? So you have the child's schedule. That schedule should not change immediately. The more you guys can adhere to that general schedule for at least the first couple months, right? So the child doesn't feel as much change. Then you can gradually work into where dad's doing Monday nights, mom's doing Tuesday nights. But in the beginning, if you can keep the child's schedule with the same people doing what they're doing, that is going to be the best for the child. It may not be the best for the parents, but it will be what's best for the child or children. And so that would be my suggestion as far as like coming up with a parenting plan.
Yeah.
And that has worked.
That's a really good tip. I hadn't heard that before, but I think that makes a lot. It's just very logical. It makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Just speaking from the emotional standpoint, I think where people really struggle with divorce is like, so maybe they don't want to be spending all that time with their spouse anymore, but the idea of missing moments with their children is just excruciatingly painful. And I can understand why, fighting for at least 50% is so important. Do you have any guidance on, just the emotional battles of being fearful that you're missing half of those moments?
This is the way, if you think about it when you visit like long distance relatives, right?
Yeah.
If you lived in the town, you would see them all the time. right? But you're not really having special moments. You're not really connecting, right? And if you think
Yeah.
about when you're married or even you're in a relationship and the kids are there, how many moments are really connecting moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, now we're divorcing or we're separating. We all of a sudden want to make sure we're having these connecting moments. We didn't have that many connecting moments when you were together with the kids, right? You're feeding them, you get home from school, you're doing their homework, you're feeding them, getting them their baths, getting them into bed. You're not sitting there necessarily reading them a book and playing with them and connecting with them. You're getting through life and surviving.
Yeah.
Right. But now that we're divorcing, all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, I've got to be a good parent. They're going to judge me. I better start reading. I better start doing all these connecting things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we need to not to be so hard on ourselves, right? Because you feeding them dinner is connecting with them. Okay. You don't have to take them to a park every weekend that you have them because all of a sudden you're divorcing. If you didn't do that during the marriage, it's not the time to go and start doing all these things because you're going to screw the kids up. Now, I'm not a counselor, but if you think about this, right, throughout their life, 3 years they've been together, with mom and dad, and they didn't go to the park all the time. All of a sudden, the parents are divorcing, and he gets to go to the park every other weekend, or he gets to go to Disneyland, and he's doing all these fun things. He's like, heck yeah, I'm happy my parents are divorced. He's going to learn manipulation. He's going to learn, to take advantage of the situation. That's not
Mm.
healthy for kids, right?
Ah, I
What's
see. I see.
healthy what's healthy for the kids is like, look, just because we're separated, we're keeping it very similar to what we had. And if dad's not taking the kid to the park every weekend, it's not going to force mom to feel like she's being less than because
Yeah.
she's not doing it. So if the parents are saying, look, let's just keep it the way we've been doing it and keep it stable, at least for 3 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let us figure out where we're going to live. Let us figure out our jobs. Let us figure out what we're doing with the parenting time. Like, let's just keep it calm and just the same, but when parents start trying to outdo each other, it's going to affect the child. And so I just would not buy into that as a parent. You are doing a good job. The child is alive. They are loved. You're doing a great job. And it will be figured out. Just follow your gut. Literally sitting there and holding them like 10 minutes before they go to bed and just telling them that you are proud of them and they are an amazing human being. It's gonna make up for going to the park 100,000 times. I mean, that's kids they just need you. They don't need all the external stuff. I don't know if that answered your question or not. I hope
It
so.
really does. Yeah, I know.
Okay.
You absolutely did. Thank you so much. That's really, really helpful. All of this has been extremely helpful
Oh,
and
good. Good, good.
so, very logical. Everything makes a lot of sense. So thank you so
Good.
much. And
Yes.
before we wrap up for this portion of this three-part series, I'm wondering if we could touch a little bit on spiritual and emotional well-being component of this very
Mhm.
hard time. Do you have any tips or tricks on how to stay grounded? I know you actually literally were talking about grounding.
Yes.
And maybe we can talk a little bit about that again, or if you had anything else to share during this emotional time in these beginning stages, what can people do to help themselves?
And I actually did touch on this even in my book a little bit, self-care, right?
No.
Because self-care is so important. You cannot pour into someone else's cup, including your children, if you have nothing in your cup, right? And we always look externally, thinking like they should be filling my cup up and I should be getting it externally. But honestly, you can get it on your own, right? Because looking in the mirror, right? And there's a gentleman on TikTok, I believe, and he says 3 feet. You have to stand 3 feet away from a mirror, right? And you tell yourself every morning, you are an amazing human being, that you are going to rock this day, that you are here for a reason and for a purpose, and you are going to be open to listening to what those reasons are. Amazing, you're smart, you're funny, right? And you've got this. And you do that just a few minutes every morning, right? As you're looking in the mirror, because 3 feet away, you can't see your wrinkles. You can't see your cellulite. You can't judge yourself. Okay.
Yeah, busy, distracted by the imperfections. Right.
Exactly.
That's
Which I
good.
was like, I love that. Right.
Mhm.
So you start your day off that way. Right. And I am a big proponent of the grounding, going outside, because the earth literally will suck the negative energy from you if you are barefoot, right? But you have to be barefoot. If you have shoes on, the rubber's going to prevent it, just like it does the lightning. But just go outside. The sun, being barefoot, just breathing in and just feeling that sun on your face and your feet on the ground. You're like, I am alive. Like, and you're alive for a reason. You're here for a purpose, right? And this is just a growing period, and it's going to be painful, but you know what? You can do hard things. You've already done hard things, and you will continue to do hard things, but you're going to rock it, and it's going to be okay. So, yeah, it's just having that faith over fear. It really is. But because we will get through it. Everybody does. It's just one of those moments that suck, but you will get through it.
You will get through it. My mother would always say, it will not always be this way. Things will not always
Yes.
be this way. And I think when you're
Yes.
in the hard times, it feels like it's always going to be like this, but there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much, Kim. This has been an
No.
incredible first
Oh,
first podcast in a series, and your advice is very, very helpful. So thank you so much for everything
well,
that you're
thank you for
giving.
having me. I love what you're doing,
Absolutely.
and I hope that you're able to touch many more hearts than you already have. And I just, again, we're just humans trying to get along in this crazy world, and we need to support each other.
Oh, I love that.
I
Really
support what you're doing, and I think you're amazing. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, don't go too far, because we are going to have Kim back for another episode where we talk about the later stages of divorce. So, but Kimberly, before you go, we have the same questions every single time we close with the guest, but because I have you twice, I want to save some of them for next time. But if you could just kind of summarize, some of the top most important things we talked about today, or even, the top most important things that you cover in your book that we may not have spoken about. Would you mind sharing what you think those are, just to leave everybody
Sure.
with that?
Definitely trust your instincts. And if you don't feel like you can hear your instincts, literally, if you have to go into a closet, have it dark, have just some soft music, whatever you're comfortable with, and just have silence. Just literally feel yourself breathing and just listening to yourself. It may not come right away, but you'll be out in the kitchen cooking, and all of a sudden it'll just click in your head. You'll be like, oh, that's what I needed to know. And that's your intuition. It will come to you. You just have to trust yourself. And we get so beaten down, whether it's life, whether it's a partner, whether it's, feeling a failure as a parent. We get so beaten down that we're like, I don't even know what I'm thinking. Well, that's when you should reach out for help. Reach out to somebody, a friend, a coach, anybody, anyone that you trust their opinion, and just say, look, I'm lost, and sometimes putting oxygen to crazy gets rid of the crazy. So I highly recommend doing that, and just staying grounded and making sure you take care of you.
Thank you so much.
Those would be the biggest things, right?
Yeah.
Then you can tackle anything. You can tackle absolutely anything if you just make sure that you take care of you and you're in that place to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm. All right. That was awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Before we go, how can listeners stay connected with you or access more information on the topics we've discussed today?
Sure. Well, they can find me on LinkedIn, Kimberly Sisk, Sisk. I work for Colburn, Hensley & Milletta. It's a law firm in Phoenix, Arizona. We are one of the more prominent family law criminal attorney offices. They can find me on LinkedIn. My book, Co-Parenting Tips You Must Have, is on Amazon, and I am in the process of creating a website called Co-Parenting Down and Dirty. Hopefully that'll be up by the time the podcast hits, the airwaves.
Thank you again, Kimberly, for being here. And thank you all to the listeners for joining us on this first episode of Clarifying Conscious Divorce. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences, by the way. So I really encourage everybody, please reach out to us on our social channels or email us. We'd love to hear from you and hear how you're liking these episodes. And in our next episode, once again, we'll continue our discussion on discussing conscious divorce, focusing on the emotional journey and the healing process. So thanks again, everybody. Bye for now. Before we part ways, I want to express my deepest gratitude to each and every one of you for tuning in. Your curiosity and openness make this journey all the more meaningful. As we navigate the realms of consciousness together, please follow our podcast for more captivating conversations. If you enjoyed what you heard, why not share the love, rate and review on your favorite platform, and help us reach more seekers on this enlightening path. And hey, the conversation doesn't end here. Dive into the show notes for additional insights, resources, and details about today's discussion. Your journey to clarity continues beyond this episode. Thank you so much for being a part of the Clarity to Consciousness community. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the boundless possibilities of your consciousness. Take care and much love to you all.